Hello, I'm Robin Worley, welcome to Lenscraft. Have you ever looked at a photograph and thought, that looks so real you could almost touch it? It's as if the objects in the photo look three-dimensional. Unfortunately, most photos don't look like this. Instead they appear flat and two-dimensional like this one, even though it's packed with sharp detail. But by applying a simple adjustment, we can produce a feeling of realism and depth in the photo. In this tutorial, I'll show you how I do this using one of the tools in the Nik collection. The tool I'll be using is the Nik Sharpener Pro plugin, which I've got open in Photoshop. Of course, you can also use this in Affinity Photo or even as a standalone editor. The Sharpener plugin comes in two flavors. There's the Pre-Sharpener plugin, which is intended for applying capture sharpening. We do this early in our workflow to compensate for any softness introduced when we capture the photo. The other plugin is the Output Sharpener, which is what we use after our processing to prepare the image for display. But there's also an often overlooked feature in the Output Sharpener that I'll be using to produce this feeling of depth in the photo. The image I'm starting with has already been converted from a RAW file, but I haven't done any of the processing yet. If I zoom in to 100% magnification, you can see that the image is sharp and detailed, but it doesn't yet have that three-dimensional look that I want to produce. I'll now launch the Nik Sharpener Pro Output Sharpener from the Nik toolbar. This creates a new copy layer for me to work with and then opens it in the plugin for editing. In the plugin, the Sharpening Tools are over on the right side of the interface, arranged into three sections. At the top, there's the Output Sharpener settings. Next we see the Creative Sharpening section, and then below that we have the Selective Sharpening Tools, which we can use to select and adjust parts of the image. This is different to the Output and Creative Sharpener settings, which are applied globally and affect everything in the image. If we look at the Output Sharpening settings, we can see that it's currently set to Display Sharpening. It's also possible to set this to Print Sharpening, but I'll save that for another video. Here we can see that there's an Adaptive Sharpening slider, which is currently set to 50%. I'm going to set this to 0, as I don't want to apply any additional sharpening to the image at this stage. That way you can see the effect of what I'm going to show you without it being influenced by the sharpening. If we then come down to the Creative Sharpening section, we can see the Output Sharpening strength is set to 100%. But because I've already set the Adaptive Sharpening to 0, this slider doesn't have any effect on the image. You can see this if I move it left and right. The slider that I'm really interested in is the Structure and Local Contrast sliders. It's these that create that feeling of depth in the image and make objects almost appear three-dimensional. Now, although we can see these sliders in the Creative Sharpening section, I don't want to apply them to the entire image. Instead, I want to apply them selectively to the rocks in the foreground and the midground of the photo. I don't want them to affect the blue of the sky because it could make that appear oversaturated. To make my change, I'll use the Selective Sharpening option, which we see at the bottom of the screen. My first step is to select the area where I want to apply the adjustment. But to do that, I first want to set the magnification to view the entire image on the screen. That will allow me to judge what I'm selecting much more easily. And to make my selection, I'll use either the Control Point or Control Line selection tools. I'll actually demonstrate both in this video, starting with the Control Line. To add it, I'll first click the Control Line icon. I can then position my mouse over the image and click and drag to draw the control line. The control line then has a sample point, which is shown as an eyedropper icon. I can position this by dragging and dropping it with my mouse. When I place it on an area, it samples that area and uses the information to select similar pixels. This is easiest to see if I turn on the mask attached to the control line by clicking the mask icon. We now see the pixels that are being selected in white, and the black pixels aren't selected at all. By carefully positioning the sample point, I'm able to select the rocks, but not the sky. I can then further refine this selection by using the control line's luminance and chrominance sliders. The luminance slider controls how closely pixels need to match my sample point in order to be selected. If I then move my slider right, the pixels must match closely to be selected, but if I move it left, the pixels don't need to be such a close match. The chrominance slider works in exactly the same way, except that it matches colour rather than luminance. The areas you see in white are the areas that are included in my selection. It's these white areas that will be affected when I apply the adjustment. When I'm happy with the selection, I'll turn off the mask so that I can see the effect of the sliders. Now, whilst using these sliders, I'll magnify the image to 100% to better judge the strength of the adjustment. I can then position the viewing area over part of the rocks that I'm interested in. I'm now ready to apply the structure and local contrast sliders attached to the control line. As I increase both sliders, by moving them to the right, we can see the detail in the rocks become more obvious. Even if I zoom out to view the entire image, we can still see the effect. The rocks now appear more detailed and the image has a depth to it. Next, let's try using a control point to select the foreground rock and add structure and local contrast. This is probably something you wouldn't really need to do. I'm probably adding too much structure and contrast to this image, but it makes it easier to see in the video. Just like with the control line, I'll start by clicking the icon to add a new control point. I'll then position my mouse pointer over the area that I want to select, which is the rock in the foreground. Now I can click to add a new control point. We then see the control point appear in the selective adjustment list on the right of the interface. I can then turn on the mask to see what the control point is selecting. This allows me to resize it and change the sensitivity with the luminance and chrominance sliders. When I'm happy, I'll turn the mask off and apply my structure and local contrast adjustments. Now let's compare the effect on the image. If we magnify it to 100%, you can see clearly the improvement the adjustments have made to the detail. Not only that, but they've given the image this three-dimensional feel that I'm so keen to achieve. Now earlier I turned off the adaptive sharpening whilst I applied these adjustments. If I add a small amount of adaptive sharpening, the detail in the image now leaps off the screen. But the question is, where in your workflow would you use this? My approach is to apply it after I've applied my other editing adjustments, but just before I apply any output sharpening. This seems to work well and makes a real difference in the image quality. But did you know this isn't the only way to make images pop with detail using the Nik Collection? If you want to learn some of my other techniques, watch this video next. Thanks for watching today and I hope you enjoyed the video. Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't done so already, and I'll see you soon for another video.